El 1 de marzo de 2023, la directora nacional de inteligencia de Estados Unidos, Avril D. Haines, dio a conocer las conclusiones de una investigación llevada a cabo por 7 agencias gubernamentales cerca de un extraño fenómeno que comenzó en La Habana, Cuba, en 2016 y que desde entonces ha venido afectando seriamente la salud de diplomáticos y oficiales estadounidenses destacados alrededor del mundo. Las agencias investigaron unos 1.500 casos reportados en 96 países. Vértigo, náuseas, dolores de cabeza, afectaciones en el equilibrio, pérdida de la memoria, trastornos auditivos y dificultad para concentrarse fueron algunos de los síntomas de estos inexplicables episodios que causaron severos traumas neurológicos a centenares de funcionarios estadounidenses y sus familiares. El gobierno catalogó el misterioso fenómeno con el eufemístico nombre de incidentes anómalos de salud. Los medios con precisión geográfica lo llamaron el Síndrome de La Habana. El informe de la comunidad de inteligencia concluyó que la mayoría de las agencias creían muy improbable que detrás de los incidentes estuviera un adversario extranjero y que se hubiera usado un arma para provocarlos. La conclusión oficial fue que los síntomas reportados por las víctimas se debían probablemente a condiciones preexistentes, enfermedades convencionales y factores ambientales. En cambio, la Academia Nacional de Ciencias, Ingeniería y Medicina de Estados Unidos había concluido en diciembre de 2020 que la causa más probable de estos fenómenos eran pulsaciones de radiofrecuencia dirigida. Lejos de cerrar el caso incidentes anómalos de salud, el informe de la comunidad de inteligencia solo logró ampliar la controversia sobre el verdadero origen del misterio. AméricaTeVé se dio a la tarea de conseguir el testimonio del oficial estadounidense de más alto rango que se conozca, afectado por el síndrome de La Habana, Marc Polymeropoulos, quien en junio de 2019 se vio obligado a retirarse al cabo de 26 años de carrera en la Agencia Central de Inteligencia, la CIA. Polymeropoulos, con rango equivalente a general de 3 estrellas, era el jefe del Servicio de Operaciones Clandestinas de la CIA para Europa y Eurasia y había merecido las más importantes condecoraciones de la agencia. Este es su testimonio.
Torito, ¿estamos listos? ¿Podemos empezar? Ok. Cierra la puerta. Ok. Let's go to the travel. Ok. Hello, Marc. Thank you for being with us.
Hola, Marc. Gracias por estar con nosotros. Usted ha tenido que pasar por mucho desde el 2017. ¿Cómo se está sintiendo ahora?
Well, first of all, it's a great honor to be here. I'm feeling much better. Thank you for asking, because it's been an incredible 5-year journey where, you know, when I was first injured, I could barely even, get up in the morning. I couldn't go to work. I had terrible headaches. I had brain fog. I couldn't drive. And now I'm at the point where, I'm feeling much, much better. I still have a headache. I've had a headache every day for 5 years, but it's not a terrible migraine, and so I'm doing better. And, there's I was told by my doctors it would be a marathon to recovery. It's true, but each day I'm improving. So thank you for asking.
Right to the point.
Directo al grano. ¿Cuál es su visión? ¿Cómo califica usted el informe de inteligencia que ha salido acerca del síndrome de La Habana? ¿Qué piensa?
So to me, it was a bit of a punch in the stomach, because something certainly happened to us, and so there's many reported cases around the world, and I'm not saying that every single one of those cases might be accurate, but the individuals I know who worked for the CIA, who were involved in high-threat operations around the world, primarily against the Russians. Many of them suffered such injuries that they had to retire medically. They're debilitating injuries. They were at the top, physical and mental, game of their lives. They were the tip of the spear for the U.S. government. Really, we're an incredible instrument. That's what the CIA is. And then they had to walk away, and their lives are forever changed. So
Like
I
yourself.
think that report was a punch in the gut, because it almost tells us that what happened to us is not real. And to me, that was a sad day. That report, I just don't agree with it. I hope that Congress investigates this, because I don't put a lot of credit in the report.
El senador Marco Rubio dijo que no saber lo que pasó no significa que no haya pasado nada.
Right. So Senator Rubio has been an incredible ally to the victims on this. And one of the things that I find most interesting is that there's certain members of Congress, and frankly, they're both on the Democratic side and the Republican side, who I think have a lot of compassion for the victims. And Senator Rubio really is one who does. And so we've all met with him over the years from time to time, but I can tell you that he is absolutely committed to finding out what happened. But more importantly, for me personally, he shows a lot of compassion and care for U.S. government employees we were serving our country. And when something happens to you when you're serving your country, you expect the government to take care of you with health care, with benefits, things that are going to be able to allow you to lead a productive life, and that just hasn't, for a long time it didn't happen. So again, I give Rubio a lot of credit on this. I'm very thankful to him and his staff.
Can we agree?
¿Estamos de acuerdo en decir que usted fue víctima de un ataque directo? ¿Concuerda usted con nosotros?
I do, and so this. Then the reason why I say this is not just based on what I've read in the media. Some of my friends were in Havana. A good friend of mine was the first U.S. Official who was injured in Havana, and he was, someone, again, before the attack, incredible physical shape, incredible mental shape, and now he walks with a service dog. He's blind in one eye. He has such terrible vertigo, he has to wear a special vest that is weighted. He's young, he's under 40 years old, but his life is forever changed. So I see him with my eyes. I see him with my eyes, and I know something terrible happened to him. And so, and again, having met some of the other victims in Havana as well, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind what happened there was an attack. And I think that the U.S. government owes it to the victims to keep investigating, not to put out a report like they just put out, which essentially says it's nothing.
¿Está dispuesto a creer que no hay un adversario extranjero ni ningún arma detrás de todo esto?
Of course not. I mean, so how does someone like myself, or my colleagues in Havana, or my colleagues in China, in Vietnam where it happened, in Serbia where it happened, these are, when you think of, you would be proud of them if you met them. These are elite of the American intelligence services and top, physical and mental condition, going to do really important work. But when I see how they have been, what has happened to them, of course I believe it's a state actor. Of course I believe it's an adversary who's doing this, because the intelligence officers were the ones who were targeted, very specifically. And now there's a lot of question on who is behind this. But when you look at places like Havana, like Moscow, like in China, in Hanoi, Belgrade, there is a common thread here. It's either the Russians or countries friendly to Russia who have carried this out. So look, maybe I'll be proven wrong. Maybe I'm totally incorrect on this. I don't think so.
Do you feel
¿Se
betrayed
siente traicionado por este informe, Marc?
Yes, I will tell you why I feel betrayed, because what they were not smart in the report. If they had said simply, we don't know yet, we don't know, and we're going to keep the investigation going. But they were so adamant that there's no foreign adversary, and they were adamant that those of us who suffered injuries, they call it, well, maybe we had pre-existing medical conditions, or maybe there was environmental conditions. They seem to explain away what happened. That's just not possible, because my doctors at Walter Reed, a U.S. military hospital, said the opposite. Said, no, actually, Marc did not have pre-existing conditions. I suffered a brain injury. It shows up on images, MRIs and things like that. I don't have any pre-existing conditions. And so I think with that report, if they had just said, we don't know and we're going to continue to investigate, I'd be fine with that. But they seem to be so conclusive. It just, that of course then raises a lot of questions in my mind. Why are they being so adamant, so strong in denying this happened? And so that to me was the betrayal.
What would
¿Cuál pudiera ser la razón? ¿Por qué los líderes habrían llegado a esta conclusión? ¿Qué piensa usted al respecto?
What do you think about it?
So I think that there's a need in their mind, and I understand this to some extent. They need to get back to business. So when you have so many people who have been injured, then you have a problem of, well, how are we going to staff? How are we going to send people overseas again to some of these hard locations if they believe that it's unsafe? And so now if they, so I think institutionally they want this to go away because they're going to have trouble staffing the overseas, the embassies.
But
and
nobody believes that.
Pero nadie lo cree.
Even
Nosotros
us.
no lo creemos.
Even us. Even, nobody.
Because I think you don't believe it because it was because they didn't say what they should have is just we don't know yet. Just say that.
Yeah.
It's okay. So one of the things I learned as an intelligence officer, when the boss of the CIA would ask me, Mark, what do you think of this? What's your assessment? And if I didn't know, you have to say I don't know. You have to do that. Because I make the joke, an intelligence officer is like a philosopher. We ask questions all the time. Well, someone gives you an answer, excuse me, then you say, well, why is that? And then you say again, well, why is that? So you keep peeling that away. And again, to me is a mistake for them to have been so conclusive in that report. And I think it also opens up the CIA and other places to later on, if they find out it was the Russians or the Cubans or the Chinese or a combination of everyone, they're going to look pretty silly. The credibility of the CIA will be affected. So why don't you leave yourself a little bit of room, analytically? And they didn't do that though. So I think that was a big mistake.
How could that happen?
¿Cómo es posible que le haya pasado a usted y no a los que estaban a su alrededor?
Usted era un pez gordo, una vaca sagrada en inteligencia.
I never thought of myself as
in Moscow? Why to you?
¿Por qué le pasó a usted en Moscú, no en Miami? En ese momento en Moscú usted estaba a cargo del servicio de clandestinaje, de las operaciones para Europa y Asia. ¿Por qué le pasó a usted?
I think it was a target of opportunity. They didn't like me to begin with. They knew who I was. Even when I had applied for a visa to go there was some they were complaining, why do you have to come visit the embassy? And so there is bad blood between the U.S. and the Russian intelligence services, of course, even though we sometimes meet them because we have to keep lines of communication open. But ultimately, I think they saw me as a very convenient target of opportunity on their turf. And just like our officials in Havana, so people have this notion. I mean, it's incredible to me that, at the time in Cuba there was a reopening of ties. There was a decision from the Obama administration to reopen ties. But what people don't understand is the war between U.S. and Cuban intelligence was going as hard as ever. Cuban intelligence didn't make the decision that they wanted to have better ties with the United States. So they were a very strong adversary. And so, again, our officials in Havana were sitting ducks there. And I think they were targets of opportunity for the Cubans or elements of the Cuban, regime who were against any kind of rapprochement with America, certainly to take action. I mean, does the Cuban government have the technology to do this alone? Well, perhaps not. My sense is that it was with the Russians together, but it makes some sense considering the history of the Russian presence on the island. And so again, when you're dealing with people like us within the intelligence community, we're smart people. When I see my officers injured in Havana, injured in Moscow, it doesn't take I don't need to have gone. I don't have to be a NASA rocket scientist to figure out who's behind this. I mean, please. And so, and then a lot of things that happened over the years. There was a lot of interviews with Cuban government officials who denied this, who said we didn't do this. Well, I mean, what are they going to say? I'd throw that all out. That's nonsense.
Cuando usted viaja a Moscú en el 2017, ¿estaban al tanto de lo que había pasado en La Habana con sus colegas y sus amigos?
Wasn't even thinking of it. That's the thing too. So I wasn't even thinking of it. And that's important to note because some of the people, the Cuban government especially, puts forward the notion that this was, they call it psychogenic. It's mass psychosis, but how is it, if I'm going to Moscow, essentially a routine trip, it's not operational. I was the equivalent of a 3-star general. I was going there to, as a senior officer. I'm not worried about the trip. I'm not nervous about the trip. I'm certainly not thinking about what happened to my colleagues the year before in Havana, which disputes the whole notion that this was some kind of mass psychosis. So again, and looking back, just knowing the cases in Havana as well, what was interesting about Havana is it was happening to different U.S. government officials there, but they weren't telling each other about it. So there was no mass psychosis there as well. So those claims that the Cubans or others make that somehow we're all kind of crazy and have all kind of suffered from this psychogenic effect, that just doesn't fly at all. Again, that's what people use to try to explain this, but to me that is there. And when you talk to doctors, there's no medical basis for this at all.
¿Cuál es su hipótesis? ¿Quién está detrás de esto? ¿Qué desean lograr? ¿Recolectar información?
Great question. Yeah.
Usted es un experto. ¿Qué piensa? Usted es un pez gordo. ¿Qué se pretendía con esto?
I'm going to use what we say all the time in the intelligence community. It depends. So here's what I think. Obviously, I think there is technology, this directed energy technology, that can be used, for signals intelligence collection. Exactly what you're saying. Collect info from your cell phone. Maybe they're trying to listen into discussions in a room, for example. But so it is possible that's how this started. But I think what the Cubans and the Russians probably, in my view, eventually learned is this also could be used as a weapon. So perhaps it evolved. Perhaps in Havana, for example, they when they did this the first couple times, they were trying to collect information, cell phone discussions, verbal discussions. But then they see it injures some U.S. officials, and they say, well, wait a second. Maybe we can use this as a weapon. And why this is and I hate to say this because it happened to me, but why this is a brilliant weapon is it's what we call non-attributable. Nobody can find out about it. It's hard to detect. And what it does is it's not shooting someone with a pistol. It's not assaulting them on the street. It's doing something, and what it's doing is they're removing American intelligence officers from the battlefield, which is exactly what the Cuban intelligence service wanted. Do you think they wanted American intelligence officers in Havana? No, absolutely not. No. Exactly what the Russians want. So it's taking us off the battlefield in a kind of, in a manner in which is hard to detect. It actually is a perfect weapon, if you think about it that way. And so that's my sense, that perhaps it started off as a signals collection tool. They saw what it was doing to people, and then they weaponized it. And that's my theory. I have no evidence on this other than I think that makes a lot of sense. And then I throw in the last piece, is that the idea that this technology doesn't exist is ridiculous. The US government, by the way, has this. The Russian government has this. If you look in the open source world, there's directed energy weapons that people use for riot control, for example. And the Department of Defense, we've been testing this stuff, and we look back on the open source on the internet, the Russians have been too. So this technology exists. This is not some kind of super secret James Bond type affair. The reason why it was never used against people, because it's unethical, it's immoral. Look what's happening to us. So there's an ethical reason not to do it. And I think, probably the Cubans and the Russians, obviously not known to be the most ethical and moral of regimes, decided to weaponize it.
Y una vez que se dieron cuenta de que era un arma, por supuesto quisieron que el resto de la comunidad de inteligencia se asustara con esto.
Right, exactly, and look what happened, and it worked. Yes. If you think about it, when we always talk about one of what we call covert action. The Russians call it active measures. But if you think about it, again, I hate to say this, I don't want to give them credit, but it's a campaign that worked. And it did cause a lot of fear in the U.S. government, and continues to do so now. So I would almost say that it has all the earmarks. I mean, it really does. It looks exactly like what an active measures campaign, a successful one, would do. It strikes fear in your opponent. It removes people from their work. It distracts. It's caused us all sorts of controversy within the U.S. government. Even what we're talking about today, they would consider a success. And so, it's one of those things that I think is going to go down in intelligence history. Unfortunately, is probably something that was successful for our adversaries.
Tengo una curiosidad. Después de la invasión rusa a Ucrania, el director de la CIA, William Burns, fue a Moscú antes de la invasión y habló con Sergei Naryshkin, Nikolai Patrushev y hasta con Vladimir Putin. Y estos episodios desaparecieron.
So my understanding is he did raise this issue with them. And I think you make a good point. Now, I don't have all the data. I'm not in the government anymore. But it seems to me that after the invasion, a lot of these incidents, certainly the number of them went down pretty dramatically. So what does that tell you? If they're not happening anymore, and we think that the Russians were the ones who were doing it, again, I didn't get my business degree at Harvard, but I'm still a pretty smart kid. Even I'm a middle-class kid from New Jersey. But ultimately, I think a lot of the incidents did go down after the Russian invasion, which leads you again to suspicion that perhaps the Russians are behind it.
Usted dijo una vez que prefería haber recibido un disparo.
Yeah.
¿Por qué dijo eso?
So if you look right behind me, there's a picture on my wall. It was painted by one of the victims. And it's a black canvas with a red splotch of paint. And we called that the gunshot. And that was the notion that we always wished we had been shot, because then people would have believed us. You have a bullet wound. Now, in some sense, we do have that with with our doctors and the doctors' reports. But I'll tell you, a lot more people would have believed us. We would have gotten medical treatment right away. If there was a gunshot, if there was a wound, I could say, look, I'm shot, I'm bleeding, I need care. No one would dispute that. And so that's why we say that all the time. And I still, to this day, feel that way. That because this is when you have a brain injury. What does that mean? It means it's silent. Nobody can see it. There's days I'm feeling okay today, but and I'm feeling much better. But some days you have a terrible headache. Some days you have what we call brain fog. You forget things a bit. I'm gonna sound like my old Greek grandmother when I say this, but sometimes weather issues affect the way I feel. I'm joking because my Greek grandmother would say, you got sick because of the weather. Well, for a lot of us with traumatic brain injury, barometric pressure drops affect the way your head feels. And so but again, it's this notion of a silent injury, a silent wound, an unseen injury, which is very, very frustrating. And that's why we say, we wish we had been shot.
Usted tuvo que jubilarse en el 2019 cuando tenía el tanque lleno, como usted mismo dijo, y tenía dolores de cabeza diarios. ¿La pesadilla comenzó entonces o ya usted la estaba viviendo antes?
Great question. So one of the things is, when I came back from Moscow in 2017, I was begging the agency, begging the CIA, to send me to the University of Pennsylvania, which at time was treating the victims from Havana. And the CIA medical officers said no. They refused to send me to the University of Pennsylvania. And that was a big fight I had with them. And then my condition deteriorated so much I could only go to work about 2 or 3 hours a day. And so then I ended up retiring in 2019. And even after retirement, when the CIA started sending officers to Walter Reed's traumatic brain injury clinic. Walter Reed is the Department of Defense's preeminent, most prestigious hospital in Bethesda, Maryland. And some of my colleagues from Havana and from elsewhere were getting treatment there, and they were having some success, but they still refused my requests. It was terrible. And so what I did, which was a very unusual step, is I went public with it. I was desperate, so I talked to a reporter, and she wrote a story about me, which then exploded all over the world, because what I was saying is I was begging for health care. And immediately after that, the agency was embarrassed. 3 former CIA directors called me and said, what's going on? And then they called CIA and they reversed their position, and I get to Walter Reed. But by the time I got to Walter Reed we're talking 2021, I was in terrible shape for 2 reasons. One is, just physically, I had blinding headaches again. I couldn't work for more than 2 or 3 hours a day. but also the whole process of my going public, which is very unusual for someone who worked for 26 years in the shadows. And my fight with CIA caused a lot of kind of mental, health issues for me too, because a lot of I felt betrayed by a lot of my former colleagues who were angry at me for going public. Not everybody, but some of them were. And so, it was only, I will tell you, until the new CIA director, Bill Burns, took power, and I knew him from a previous overseas posting, that things changed. I got to Walter Reed, and he showed a lot of compassion, and I was brought a little bit back more into the old CIA family. But it was a really tough road, and so it was both these physical injuries, but also kind of on the mental health side. So, when you said the hell started, well, it certainly started in December of 2017, but I had a pretty public fight with CIA about this until finally I get to Walter Reed. And let me tell you one more piece that's really important, and I haven't talked about this in public at all, is that Congress passed and President Biden signed what's called the Havana Act. And that provides compensation for victims. And I received that. So just recently, I actually received a settlement from them. And to me, that was a pretty incredible moment, because what it just I mean, I'm not going to sit here and gloat or smile, but I won my case. I proved that I had a brain injury, suffered in the line of duty. And so that to me was kind of the final piece of my health journey. And so it's been a terrible ride. I wouldn't wish this on anyone. I will tell you that. It's I battled Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and terrorist groups my whole career in counterterrorism. Made a lot of enemies along the way, but I wouldn't wish this what I've gone through even on my worst enemy. It's been a terrible 5 years. But again, I'm feeling better. There's hope for the future, but it's been a long road.
But are you still?
Pero usted quiere saber lo que pasó.
To know what happened.
Yeah.
¿Sigue usted tratando de averiguar lo que pasó? ¿Están investigando usted y sus amigos, las víctimas? ¿Qué piensa al respecto? Hasta hoy el Pentágono no se ha dado por vencido.
Today, the Pentagon doesn't giving up on this matter.
Well, you make a great point. And so, of course, I put the whole issue of Havana syndrome into kind of three categories. One is accountability of how we were treated in the past. And the CIA, to its credit, did, in essence, tear down the old medical office. They changed everything because they treated us so badly. Number two is healthcare, and they've gotten better. Again, I was compensated. I received the Havana Act compensation. But the last piece, which I call attribution, where you're talking about what happened, that's the remaining mystery. And I don't think CIA has proven itself capable in investigating this. I think the investigation is moving to the Department of Defense, where it should be, in terms of resources, in terms of personnel, but also not being biased, not having any agenda. And what you're referring to there is some articles in Politico over the last couple of days, which shows not only that has DOD taken over the investigation, they've been involved in a lot of research and development, testing. This article I think that you're talking about is they have funding to do testing on animals to see what is an animal who is subject to microwave radiation, what does their brain look like compared to mine. That's really important, because again, we're going to find what caused this, and then of course the next step is how to treat it. So I'm very thankful to the Department of Defense for this. I think it's the right place to go, and I think there's support in Congress for this from Senator Rubio and others. They will push funding to the Department of Defense. Everything needs to be funded, so that's important. And ultimately, I think we're going to get to the bottom of this one day. But the fact that it's with DOD now is a very important piece in solving this.
Why do you think that?
¿Por qué cree usted que fue en La Habana y no en otro lugar?
In Havana, not in other places.
Lots of different theories on this. I mean, I think that, in my view, and again, this is not based on evidence that I have, it's just my opinion, is that there were probably elements of the Cuban security services that did not want good ties with the United States, and that and I don't know if it's the Cuban government as a whole, but certainly elements of the Cuban intelligence who worked with Russia on this to hurt our officials. That's my sense. And so I think that it started in Havana because you had an environment which the Cuban government controlled totally. It's a police state, as you all know. American officials are very vulnerable. There's nothing that an American can do. They can't pick up a phone, walk around their house, go down the street, or talk to anyone, any Cuban citizen without the Cuban intelligence seeing it. So they had control, so they would be able to predict where any U.S. Official would be. But I think that it makes some sense to me that they would do this in order to promote their own agenda, with the Cuban intelligence services. That's just my opinion. I don't, because, but again, it goes back to the fact of if you talk to people at that time, and I think there was a lot of, clearly there was a lot of publicity about a warming of ties between the U.S. and Cuba. But those of us on the inside who really know about Cuban intelligence, there was no warming of ties whatsoever. And so a lot of that was a lot of a charade, I think, for public consumption, because there are still really strong elements within Cuba that were really, dedicated to the communist government, saw the United States as absolute enemies, and were not ready for any kind of war. And so I think there is some, it makes some sense to me that they would try to torpedo kind of American engagement on the island. But that's my 2 cents. People have differing opinions on this. I certainly don't believe the Cuban government denials that they had nothing to do with this. It doesn't happen on Cuban soil without either their active participation or letting the Russians come in.
Yeah.
And I can't even fathom that. Anyone who knows Cuba understands that they would have to have some knowledge.
¿Cómo pudieran los líderes de la comunidad de inteligencia explicar que el paciente cero, quien usted conoce muy bien, fue un oficial de inteligencia encubierto trabajando en La Habana en el 2016? ¿Cómo puede explicarse eso?
Well, so that's why this, it's frustrating when you see U.S. government intelligence community officials now say, we don't have an adversary who did this, but we acknowledge Americans have been hurt. So what is it? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And again, we're not talking about Americans who are sitting at the U.S. Embassy in London, or in Athens, or in Berlin.
Or in Vienna.
Or in Vienna. There are cases there, and those cases make some sense because there's some Russian presence there. But we're talking about Havana, and so and the other point of this too is there are multiple officials in Havana who have really suffered traumatic injuries, and so the idea that we would somehow think that a state actor was not involved, you can't explain that conclusion. Now, what I would understand if they said we don't know. We just don't know. That's okay. To me, that's okay. That's an honest assessment from a smart intelligence officer. The last piece I'll say on this is when you look at a place like Havana, and frankly, there is, at the time, it was a very small U.S. embassy, very small U.S. government presence. We actually don't, and the security services are all over us there. The notion that somehow we have the ability to tell what's going on inside there is just not accurate. We call it a denied area. What does that mean? It means we don't, it's hard for a U.S. official to move around. It's hard for us to collect information. So, when the U.S. government says we definitely know that the Cubans were not involved or the Russians were not involved, well, how? We don't have the ability, we don't have the insight on what goes on inside of Havana. To make that assessment. You see where I'm coming from on this?
Absolutely.
And so, it's not like New York City or Miami or Pittsburgh. In an open society, it's a place where we actually don't have a lot of understanding. And so, again, I would have preferred if they said we just don't know. But to discount the state actor piece, I don't understand how they can do that.
That was your last. Ese ha sido su último comentario sobre este tema y ha ido directo al grano.
En el 2020, la Academia Nacional de Ciencia, Ingeniería y Medicina halló que la causa más probable del síndrome de La Habana fue energía de pulsaciones dirigidas de frecuencia. ¿Cuál versión usted cree que sea la correcta? ¿La de la Academia Nacional o la evaluación del Consejo de Inteligencia Nacional?
This is such a good question because, what I found at the end of the day is I listen to my doctors. I listen to scientists. I listen to experts. I have respect for the intelligence community, of course, but what you are citing right now, the National Academy of Sciences report, these are experts in the field of medicine and science. And they said the most plausible cause of injury for us was directed energy weapon. That to me is really important because what are they looking at? They're looking at medical records. They're looking at our brain. They're looking at this testing we talked about with the Department of Defense. How we went from that report to then what was just released last week is a mystery to me. How does that make sense? And I also know that some of the officials on that who wrote that in the National Academy of Sciences report were kicked off the panel afterwards. I think probably because it was inconvenient for the government to hear what they had to say. But again, I listen to scientists and I listen to doctors, and that to me is the most important part of it. But I think what you're showing is a level of dysfunction in the U.S. government. And so, people always ask me, they said, why is this so controversial? And at first I would say, my answer was, is it a conspiracy? And I would say, well, probably not. Usually things like this are based on incompetence. People make mistakes, but I've changed my tune on this because I think it's government dysfunction. So you have different sides of the U.S. government saying different things. So that what you the National Academy of Sciences report, really important. But now there's this National Intelligence Council report that seems to refute that. Yet, then you have the Department of Defense just the other day saying, no, we believe it, we're moving forward full speed. So what is it? What is it? There's no whole of government approach. No one is speaking together, which is why I think it would have been better in this intelligence report to have just said, we don't know yet.
¿Existe una agenda política?
I mean, the political agenda to me is much more of the sense of this is too hard to deal with if it's true. So what if we assess that let's say it's the Cubans, the Russians, the Chinese, all three, one of the three, two of the three, actually did this. So here's the problem. What is the policy option there? Because I always say that if we do catch who has done this, it's an act of war against Americans. And you have to have an appropriate response. Well, what does that mean? So it's almost easier for there not to be that conclusion, because if there was a conclusion, how do you hold the Cuban government or the Russian government or the Chinese government, responsible? And that's a policy decision that is very difficult because there's Americans who are critically injured. And so to me, it's not necessarily a political agenda in favor of one country or another. It's far easier not to solve this. And I think that's a mistake.
En el 2019, usted dijo que el gobierno de Estados Unidos había sido por lo menos incompetente en este asunto. ¿Cómo lo ve ahora después de este informe?
Dysfunctional. It's dysfunctional.
In the middle of the war.
Because it just doesn't work. I think the White House believes one thing. I think the intelligence community believes one thing. I think DOD believes one thing. The scientists believe one thing. All different things. I mean, and so to me, it just it shows kind of a lack of a strategy. There's no one institution, one body has taken over this. But going back to that question, I mean, I do think there's biases in the intelligence community because they don't want to find the truth. For two reasons. One is that it's going to be hard for us to staff our overseas missions if it's unsafe. But the other part is, if we do find out who it is, that's going to cause a huge concern in U.S. policy circles on what to do. It's much easier to sweep this under the rug.
Cuba.
Para usted, Cuba, el régimen cubano, ¿es una amenaza a nuestra seguridad nacional?
Our national security.
One of the things that I think about all the time is any notion of rapprochement with Cuba cannot happen until we figure out what happened in Havana at the embassy. It's absolutely critical. There cannot be a normalization of ties with Cuba until we find out what happened to the U.S. embassy officials there. That is unfair to them, to my colleagues who were injured in Cuba. We have to find out what happened to them before there's any kind of forward progress in U.S.-Cuban relations. I think that's a separate issue of human rights concerns in Cuba and the nature of the Cuban regime. But just on a personal level, I would find it very hard to support a policy of normalization until we find out what happened at the embassy there. And that to me, that's just an ethical and moral issue.
Yesterday,
Ayer usted era un pez gordo. ¿Cuál es su visión ahora? El otro Marc en la agencia.
your colleagues now.
You bring up a really difficult question because I'm sure, some of them love me and some of them hate me. Again, the idea of speaking out, I've been very forceful on this issue, so I'm sure I irritate a lot of people. I think they have a lot of sympathy for me for the kind of the personal journey, the health journey that I've gone on. But I'm sure many of them don't like that I'm so outspoken on this. But I wouldn't be outspoken if I thought that the government was doing the right thing. And so certainly I've been an advocate for healthcare for the victims. But when it comes to a report like this, I'm sure they're not happy in what I'm saying to you and to other people in the media. But what I really emphasize is I just think the investigation should continue. But again, I think a lot of people don't like when people don't like what I have to say. My response to them is turn off the TV. Don't read the article where I'm mentioned.
Yesterday you were.
Ayer usted era un leal guerrero. ¿Hoy qué es para ellos?
So and there's also the notion that people in the intelligence business, they think when they retire sometimes shouldn't talk to the media. But I take a different view on that because I think it's actually really important that we do. And this goes to a whole other subject and issue. But in the age of what we call open source information, what you all do in the media, you can actually learn a tremendous amount. And for the American intelligence services to stay relevant, to stay important, we have to explain to the American people what we do. And so I think it actually is important for former CIA people to write books or talk in the media, because I think it's an indispensable institution. I mean, it's the U.S. nation's first line of defense. CIA still does do incredible things. I'm very supportive of our of the mission of our organization, no doubt at all. But I think that talking in public is important because we have to justify our existence. We get billions of dollars each year. So the American people, especially in an age of open source, where you can learn so much. I mean, if you can follow the events, what's happening in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, in the media, I would argue almost as well as in the secret world of intelligence. I mean, that we have such incredible access to commercial satellites, TV, and then there's these open source, open source intelligence firms like Bell and Cat who do these investigations. And so, but for CIA, we better be able to. We need people to speak out, speak in favor of the intelligence community, because if not, who's going to pay the bills? The American people. I work for the American people. They paid my salary, so I think that some transparency is okay.
Para poder obtener una imagen más clara de lo que pasó, ¿pudiera usted, por favor, regresar a ese momento, ese día, describir lo que pasó en ese instante?
Sure. So it was early December of 2017. I was staying at a 5-star hotel, only several blocks from the U.S. Embassy. We went out to dinner that night. Nothing special. But I woke up in the middle of the night. I don't remember hearing anything. But I woke up with a terrible case of vertigo. The room was spinning. It was actually terrifying. I had been in places like Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria. I've been shot at many times, but this was the most terrifying moment of my life because I had no control. Like literally, the room is spinning. I had a splitting headache. I had what's called tinnitus, ringing in my ears. I felt physically sick that I was gonna, from all ends. But it was a pretty terrifying moment. It was a moment where I felt I totally lost control. But the vertigo piece was pretty shocking, and I'd never felt anything like this. And those symptoms, stayed with me. Some of them to this day. Most of them have resolved. But that was what initially happened, and it was I don't consider myself, the toughest guy in the world, but I've been through a lot of stuff over the years in some conflict zones, and I was pretty scared that night.
What did you do?
¿Y qué hizo usted después?
At the morning, what did you do?
In the morning, I called the embassy in the morning, and I went to a local pharmacy, and they got me some medication to kind of control the nausea and the vertigo. It resolved a bit the next day, but the day after, all those symptoms came back. I was just eating at a restaurant, and the vertigo was terrible again. And then eventually I made it back to the United States just a couple days later. And that's where the symptoms actually got worse, where I developed over time. I forgot to mention, I lost my long distance vision. I couldn't drive. I had brain fog. I was forgetting things. And so that was in early 2018. And so that was, I knew something was definitely wrong. And ultimately, again, by summer of 2019, I couldn't go to work for more than 2 hours a day. And it was time for me to retire. I had turned 50, so I could retire. But I didn't want to. I mean, I still was a very high level officer. And in fact, the senior levels of the agency were asking me to stay on for even a bigger promotion, to what we call the 7th floor, the top level of the agency.
And
what you dream of.
Usted quería estar en el séptimo piso.
They were offering me a position there, but I had to say no, and I had to retire because I had to really, focus on my health and getting me better. And I'll tell you, when I finally made it, after begging the agency for healthcare, going public, when I finally made it to Walter Reed's Traumatic Brain Injury Center, that's where I really started improving, because I was there for 1 month, 10 hours every day. And they, and these are the world's most renowned doctors and nurses on traumatic brain injury. And so they gave me so many different tools. They gave me hope on feeling better. And so it's and they're also were honest. And so they said, look, you're going to come here. They said to me, what's your best case scenario for leaving? And I said, well, I hope I'm 100% better in a month. And they said, you're going to be lucky if you're 30% better.
Wow.
And I probably was less than that, but I did show improvement. And so it's just a marathon, and it's the idea of how to take care of your body with, so there's a pharmaceutical option. There are some drugs that can be used. That didn't work for me, but there's things about my sleep habits and nutrition, exercise, a lot of things. And I say this seriously because this is how a lot of people have found healing through things like deep breathing, yoga. Everyone thinks I'm crazy when I say things about yoga, but I'll tell you a funny story about yoga. I visited the U.S. Embassy in Sana'a in Yemen in 2016, before this happened to me. And I remember going to visit, and I saw all these people doing yoga in the small patch of grass. And I said, I was being a jerk. I said, who are these people? And they said, I was mocking them. And they said, those are members of SEAL Team 6. And so then I said to myself, all right, I better not make fun of these people.
No.
And so, but it's the idea, but there's ways to take, it's kind of the softer side of medicine, which is yoga, which is, nutrition and sleep and these habits. And over time, it's proven for victims of traumatic brain injury that leads to some healing. And so a lot of, to be honest, a lot of, kind of therapy with psychologists and psychiatrists. But it's a long journey. And ultimately, I credit the doctors at Walter Reed for really saving me. It's pretty amazing. When you walk in there, every day when you're there, they ask you in the morning, did you feel like you were going to kill yourself last night? It's a pretty jarring statement, and I would always say no. And then at the end of the program, they interview your family. They bring your family in to interview them, and my wife immediately said that she was terrified that I would do something like that, which gave me the notion I might have been in far worse kind of mental health shape than I thought. And I've certainly improved on that. So I really credit those doctors and staff for saving my butt. No doubt. And there's some great Americans there. Because here's the other thing, they believe me. They think that report you're holding up there is nonsense, by the way. And they also, so when that report, I'm sorry to interrupt, really important point. When that report came out, I got a message from the doctors at Walter Reed, and they said, ignore that, just take care of yourself.
Oh, nice.
Just, really important.
The next morning,
¿Lo informó a la mañana siguiente?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, they took me to the pharmacy.
But American intelligence.
La inteligencia sabía que algo había pasado en el 2016 en La Habana.
In Havana.
We weren't sure at the time, so the first thing in the morning is, what the hell happened to me last night? Why am I feeling so poorly? So we I remember talking and saying, hey, maybe it was food poisoning. I don't know. I mean, but then when it kept going for several days, we knew it was not food poisoning. But what they wanted me to do is just get home to see our medical staff. So it was just the idea I had to get out of there. And so I remember that was a tough plane ride home. But no, I was look, initially I wasn't exactly sure what had happened. by the time I got back, and immediately I went to the CIA's doctors, I did say, hey, does this look like what happened to our victims in Havana? And their first inclination was, no, you look a little bit different, which I think was a mistake on their part. And that's because I say the same thing all the time. I'll say it to you today. I'm not talking to you here today if all the CIA had done was send me to the doctor, right? They refused healthcare, which to me was immoral, but I was trying to go, as I said, to the University of Pennsylvania, which was treating our victims from Havana. But they said no. But that should be a title of my book one day, is, all I wanted to do was get a doctor's appointment. None of this, if they had done the right thing and treat me, I probably wouldn't have come out in the media about this, and then no one would have known.
Right now,
en ese momento estamos viendo lo que está pasando en Ucrania.
What happened in Ukraine.
Right.
Cuba regime.
El régimen cubano apoya la propaganda rusa con campañas de desinformación, etc. ¿Qué piensa de esto?
Misinformation campaign, etc., etc. What do you think about it?
Well, I mean, clearly, Cuba is an adversary of the United States. They're partners with the Russians. I think they vote with them consistently at the UN on just about everything. The Cuban-Russian relationship is one that's always been of concern. But again, it's the notion of, there's always this dream that some Americans have of kind of this rapprochement with renewed ties with Cuba, and that's fine to have, but it's not fine to have with the current Cuban regime. Of course, we want to return to the days where there would be U.S. tourists and trade and all the things, for a country that's just 90 miles away. But the current nature of the Cuban regime is that Cuba is an enemy of the United States. But it does always seem that there are those in America who have this dream of everything kind of miraculously getting better there. One could hope, but not with the current state of the regime. Again, one, as you say, that supports Russia in its fight in Ukraine. I'm not sure that anything that where Cuba has been on the side diplomatically on anything the United States has done over the last several years, and so we'll see.
Marc,
Thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias.
Después de esta entrevista, The Wall Street Journal se hizo eco de las declaraciones de Marc Polymeropoulos a AméricaTeVé con el artículo de María Anastasia O'Grady revisitando el síndrome de La Habana. Luego se supo que el Departamento de Estado acordó pagarle $460,000 al ingeniero Mark Lindsay, víctima del síndrome de La Habana, que había demandado al gobierno. Y por último, se reveló un documento desclasificado según el cual un panel de expertos informó a la directora nacional de inteligencia, Avril Haines, que el síndrome de La Habana podría ser el resultado de un arma electromagnética. Ahora más que nunca, la polémica sigue abierta.